So really, it's quite a large amount of the assessment, quite a high percentage really for impact. And so the way in which we write about our impact to ref is through impact case studies. So we have, we're working on about 40 impact case studies for Wolverhampton to be submitted to ref next year. And they're all sorts of a range of different things on all sorts of different projects. They tend to be projects that have been going on a little while, and we can really demonstrate excellent impact. So, and we're going to go through some of those examples of those in those subject-specific sessions towards the end. So another thing to bear in mind is that different people have different definitions of impact. So that's the ref definition. UKRI use a different definition in what they work on. So when you submit funding bids and funding applications to UKRI schemes, and they ask you about impact, they're expecting you to think about this definition. University of York I've put here because different universities have different definitions themselves. So we're working on our own definition as well as a Wolverhampton definition of impact, something that really resonates more with us as an institution. And this is what York have done here, and other universities do the same. And we have to bear in mind that different countries have different definitions as well. So you might even, as a researcher, be collaborating with people in different countries. You might be applying for funding from different countries, and you've got to bear in mind that people see impact as a different thing there as well. But really, when you break all of these definitions down, it's really the same thing. Your research is making a difference to the society. So we have to think about that. And then, as we mentioned, kind of with that distinction of being beyond academia. And that's something a lot of our academics, who, particularly the ones that have been in academia for a long time, really struggle with. So they're used to saying, oh, we went to 20 different conferences with our research, and we're saying that's kind of academic research. We're not really interested in that. What we want is the more outside of academia impact, and we'll talk about that today. Okay, so why is impact important? And I've quickly rattled off this little diagram to kind of illustrate to you. We've got, you can do your research and you can work within your academic community, or you can have impactful research, which is much bigger and much wider and has much more contributions. And academics have different reasons why they became academics. Some of them say they do it because they want to make a difference, but actually a lot of them just kind of cite curiosity is the reason they wanted to get into research, and they don't worry too much about what their findings will do for the wider world. So really, we have to ask that question. We have to bear in mind that people have different reasons for wanting to achieve impact. So that main one that we feel, first glance, why wouldn't you want to contribute to society? Why wouldn't you want to make a difference? It's really the biggest reason. We really want you as academics to think about why you're doing your research, and the fact that you want to make the world a better place, and by thinking about your research impact, that's going to have a big impact on that. It's a way of enhancing your research. So a lot of academics, we find when we've asked them to think more about impact, partly because perhaps they're part of an impact case study, we found that they've actually started to think about their research in a very different way. They've gone and sought out collaborations with external organizations and industry partners, and all of a sudden those industry partners have got all sorts of ideas about the research they can do, and as a result their research is really, really enhanced. And we've got examples of academics who at first didn't really think about impact and didn't really worry about it too much, but since they've been asked to think about it more, they've actually said that they feel like their research is much stronger as a result. So it's a good reason to think about it. You do increase your ability to apply for funding, particularly we know for any UKRI funding calls, generally you're going to be having to think about impact, and it's really, particularly here at Wolverhampton, one of the weakest areas of our applications historically. So we struggle to really show the pathways to impact, the way in which we think the research will impact the wider world, because we haven't had to think about it so much, and it's something we're going to have to think about going forward. So if you are if you're at the start of your research career and you want to stay in research and you want to apply for funding, you're really going to have to think about impact. And the projects which get funding are the ones which have impact very much centered within their research and ready to go, and with very clear pathways to how they're going to achieve it. So it's something you have to think about. And I put in here future job prospects as well. I think if you go and apply for an academic role anywhere now, there's a very good, a very high likelihood that there will be a question asking you about the impact of your research. So you need to have that ready to go. You know, what do I foresee the impact being of my research? So it's something you really do need to think about as you move forwards. Okay, so we're going to think about some types of impact and what we mean by impact, and kind of helpfully REF have sorted this for us. So REF came up with a really big document which you can find if you go on the REF website and look for all their guidance documents. You can find something called Annex A, which is an examples of impact, and it's a really long document with just lists of examples of impact under different headings, and these are the headings that they put impact under. So the first one is health and well-being of people and animal welfare. So if your research is perhaps in the medical side of things or psychological side, you may well say, right, we're going to be having impacts on health and well-being. We can show that, you know, the Holy Grail is we save lives through our research, or we've improved quality of life for people, or anything like that. And animal welfare is put under that as well. We've got creativity, culture and society. So if your research is going to lead to a new type of art or interesting art installations that have been created, or a documentary that was made, then we can say that you've had impact under creativity, culture and society. Then we've got social welfare. So if your research has led to improvements in equality, or kind of in helping in normally underrepresented groups be represented better within society, then you've got your impact in the social welfare. We've got commerce in the economy, where if you're working with an industry partner and you've meant that, you know, a small medium enterprise that has made more money because of your research, then you can say you've contributed to the economy. Public policy, law and services. So you might work with UK government or local government to introduce different policies and laws, and so a lot of researchers end up doing that. They end up going and giving evidence to Parliament and contributing to changes in policy. We've got production. So if you, for example, work in agriculture and you, as a result, farmers have increased their yield of a certain crop, then that impact would come under that. Practitioners and delivery of professional services, enhanced performance or ethical practice. So if you're essentially, your research helps certain professional bodies introduce different ethical guidelines to how they approach work, then it ticks that box. You've got environment. So if you work in wildlife conservation, for example, or water conservation or soil conservation, it'll tick some of those boxes. And then understanding, learning and participation. And this is one of the more misunderstood ones, and some of the trickier ones we find to actually to really evidence impact of is people sometimes say to us, oh, well, I appeared on television, and then we start asking them questions about their impact and they can't really answer. But essentially, if you work closely with schools, or you help produce education materials and all sorts of things, it'll tick under that box. And then there's the question. So yes, you might feel that you have impact that ticks a number of these different topics, and you think, okay, I'm doing well here, but really you might ask that question, what is good impact? And the first caveat I'll give is it very much depends on the field and the context that we're looking at. So if you come from an engineering background and feel that you've had impact on the economy, we might expect you to have made millions of pounds for an organisation. But if you're coming from an arts background where perhaps those impacts aren't as common, we might expect a different type of impact. We might expect you to impact a different number of people. It's very difficult to say. So we just got to be aware that as we go in different fields, it is more difficult to get impact. And you have to think about your field and the kind of impacts that are happening within your research area before you can really compare yourself. It's very difficult to compare yourself to different research fields. So REF do use two kind of very specific terms to define what they think good impact is. So the first one is reach. So reach refers to the kind of extent of the benefits that are being seen. And the main way we would usually define reach is essentially the numbers of people that have benefited as a result. So your research might have benefited 100 people, it might have benefited 10,000 people, it might have benefited 2 million people. And that kind of decides the reach of your research. It doesn't just have to be numbers, it can also be the diversity that you've managed to reach, the diversity of groups. You might have managed to get your research into to benefit a minority that people don't normally look at. We might consider that very, very good reach because it's a bit more difficult to get in. But generally, when people talk about reach, they're really thinking about the kind of numbers of people that are going to be benefiting as a result. We also have significance. So significance is the amount in which beneficiaries are benefiting. So the level in which they're benefiting. So you might change someone's life a little bit, you might change it a lot, you might introduce a policy which completely changes the way in which we think about life, whereas you might introduce your research might have benefited to a policy which changes a little bit of the way in which the world works. You know, it's more to do with the amount in which people are benefiting. So we really have to think about both those things when we think about what we might consider good impact. And this is my little graphical representation of how to explain that. So if your research has benefited a few people, it's got low reach, and it really has only benefited them in a little way. We can't really demonstrate a huge benefit in terms of what's happened to those few people. We wouldn't consider that very good impact because it hasn't benefited a lot of people and it hasn't really benefited them in a strong way. We might have your research whereby you've benefited huge numbers of people, millions of people have heard about your research. You've been on television and millions of people have listened to you talk about your research, but really we can't show that there was a behavior change as a result, or really we couldn't really show there was much benefit to those people from listening about your research. We might still say it's got low significance, and that's okay impact. We can maybe show that that's fairly good impact, but really without that significance, those millions of people it doesn't really matter too much to us. And kind of in the opposite direction, you might have had found a way of changing the lives of just a very small number of people. So you might say, oh, my research led to the change in the policy of one classroom of a school in terms of how they deliver their content. And we'd be saying, well, brilliant, you've changed the lives of those 30 people, but really for us to consider it really strong impact, we'd need to see that spread across multiple classrooms. And so that's where our aim is overall, is we're looking for research which has really big reach, but it also has really big significance. So research which has gone on to change laws which benefit millions of people, or we can come up with numbers and numbers of examples, and that's what we'll do later in the subject specific sessions. But that's what we're really after. So when you think about your impact, you need to think about not just the benefits that could arise, but also how you're going to benefit as many people as you can with that research. So there we go. So good impact is impact that benefits a great number of people in a significant way. However, it doesn't have to be this kind of all singing, all dancing international kind of impact. You can still have great impact on a local level. Your research doesn't have to go to all the countries in the world. It can just be within, say, we're talking about Wolverhampton, so it could just be Black country impact, but it's really benefited the Black country in a really significant way. We can consider that good impact. So don't always think that your research has to be this all-encompassing, internationally impacting research. You really can do a lot based on a local level, and then of course over time your impact can balloon out and can start impacting people in different ways. And we see that a lot, actually. We see examples where our researchers have had impact in just the local area in a very specific way, and then other people in other countries have kind of picked it up, and all of a sudden we see these pockets where in Portugal or New Zealand, people have picked up on that research and are using it in the same way, and we kind of go look at these different places that are picking up on it. So it's something we can work on as well, is how, if you feel like you're just having impact on a local level, how we can expand that. And that's something, it's part of our jobs kind of as research impact officers to suggest ways in which we can achieve that. So getting impact is just kind of the first step. We have to think about how we're going to evidence it. So essentially for REF, if we can't evidence impact, they're not interested. We need to be able to prove that the impact's actually made a difference to people. And it's something you have to think about as you go along. There's no point in saying, I introduced, like I said, I keep use that example of I went on television, 2 million people saw me talking about my research, and then someone would say, oh, did their behavior change as a result of what happened? And we'd go, oh, I don't know. And you go, well, we need to find that out. How do we find that out? And that's something we can think about. So we're kind of providing a range of corroborating evidence to REF for our impact case studies. So it can range from testimonials from people high up in organisations. We can use quotes from social media. We sometimes use published reports. It depends on the field. It depends on the impact we're talking about. But it's something we really do have to think about. And when right at the end of this session, we'll think about how you embed it in your research. And one of the main questions there is, what evidence of impact are you going to collect? And it's something that we have to really think about. And it's something that we've really struggled with some of our researchers is, oh, I had this impact 3 years ago. What evidence did you collect? Well, I didn't collect any evidence. Oh, okay. Can we go back and ask them? Well, I don't know. I haven't talked to this person for 3 years, and then it gets complicated. So it's something we have to think about from day one. Okay, so I'm going to put up a few examples. I've already talked about one of them a little bit, actually. So what I want you to do is just a minute for each example. I'll pop it up on the screen. I want you to think about the examples, decide if they're good or bad impact, or where they come on the kind of scale of impact. I want you to bear in mind that we would need to be able to evidence reach and significance for these impacts. And then I want you to just think about your answer to that, and then just pop your kind of response in the chat bar. So this is our first example. So someone's research has led to a new type of cavity wall installation being developed. It's taken up by a house building company which builds 10,000 new homes a year. So would you consider that good or bad impact? And if you can type why you might think that as well, and then we'll have a look at it. Okay, we got some stuff coming through. Brilliant. So yeah, so similar kind of responses coming through, and it's good to see you are definitely thinking about lots of different aspects of impact in terms of whether it's reached enough people, but also how we'd evidence it as well. And so just to say my thinkings on it, so yeah, we consider it a kind of excellent impact. It ticks lots of different boxes of impact, which is always nice. There's environmental benefits, but there's social benefits because it's going to be saving people money from reducing their energy costs, and we can even tack on that company might benefit financially as a result as well. And we can evidence it in different ways. So we could talk to people and we could say, have you seen your your costs go down, but also if we know for sure from our research that having this insulation will improve the energy efficiency of your house by a certain percentage, we can just do the maths and say to any funding body, look, 10,000 houses have saved so many kilowatts a year, that equals this improvement. And actually we can evidence it just by our own research as well. So it is, we might consider it a good impact. This one's to see if you've actually been listening. So a lecturer is invited to BBC Breakfast to talk about their research on technology to remove plastic from oceans. So would we consider that good, or what kind of impact might we consider that, and why? Brilliant. So yeah, I can see people. So you were all listening. So yeah, BBC Breakfast it's a good example, and it's an example that a lot of our researchers have tried to use in impact case studies, and then we've had to say to them, "I'm really sorry, you know, unless we have a way we can evidence that behaviour changed, something changed as a result of you going on BBC Breakfast, we can't really use it in a case study because the panels aren't going to be interested because you haven't shown any significance." So we'd have to think about how we could find that significance. So really, we'll go through. So I've shown that too many people, as I used before. So here I've put some text. So it's good reach. Say if 2 million people have seen it, it's good reach, but we can't really demonstrate a huge amount of significance. But what we can do is, and I'll talk about that in a second actually, is we could go on social media, we could see if people are talking about it, if people are thinking about their plastic waste as a result. You might find that people have gone, oh my God, have you seen on BBC Breakfast this thing about plastic waste? I'm going to stop reducing my plastic. You can say there's been a debate there. We can maybe use that to kind of justify a little bit of significance. What we'd really want is finding out that as a result of this appearance, a company has contacted the researcher and said, I want to use your technology in my waterways, and then all of a sudden huge impact and we can use it. And what we might consider this sort of appearance on TV is something called a pathway to impact, which I mentioned a little bit earlier. So it might open up opportunities to achieve impact, and we can use it as a pathway to impact, as kind of in a ref impact case study. We might not be able to use it, but in other ways which we can use it, and it is very useful. And what we'd sort of suggest to anyone going on a TV show or having going on radio or anything like that is have a think about the evidence you're going to collect of your impact. If you go on TV and then straight away we get the university to tweet about your research, and we can survey the people that have seen it, and we can ask them lots of questions, and we can follow up afterwards, then we can collect evidence. So it's something we have to think about, is say to our researchers, can you just be prepared if something like this happens, because sometimes it happens out of the blue. You can be asked to go on TV the next day. Can you just be prepared for us to collect some evidence of impact? Here's another example. So an education researcher is invited to give evidence to Parliament's Education Select Committee on their work on how to create an inclusive environment for students with learning difficulties. So do you think this is good, bad, middling? What kind of impact do we think? Thanks, Catherine. It's nice to know that it's all working so far. Great, yeah. So you're all thinking exactly what we want. So it's a tricky one. We might consider it good impact because you've had the opportunity to kind of educate policymakers. So that select committee are really the most important decision makers around education policy in the country. And so if you can show that you've had an opportunity to influence them, we consider that. It's very hard to show the significance, but really that's fantastic reach in terms of these are the real decision makers and you've had a chance to influence them. But really, like a few of you have said, ideally what we'd be able to show is through that meeting there was a change in policy, or it was debated in Parliament, and then as a result an education policy was changed, and then even further down the line can we show that it was implemented in schools and that change resulted. And if we can show that entire kind of step by step the changes going through, we've got huge impact, and we would be really proud of this impact. We do have a lot of examples of our researchers being asked to go and give evidence, and then that's all we ever really hear about it afterwards. And we still report it and we still talk about it, but really ideally we'd like to see what happens in the future. So what we would ask our researchers, if they have had any kind of interaction with Parliament, is for them to just keep their eyes peeled on what's coming out. If there's any updates, quite often Parliament and these official documents won't cite specific researchers, so we have to really say, can you read through and can you see if there's any bits that are relevant to you, and if it seems like it's come from your research, then we can maybe use it. So it's a different world, the Parliament world, and we do run sessions on how you achieve impact in Parliament. We haven't got any planned at the moment, but we have run them in the past, so I'm sure we will again. Okay, a researcher gives a keynote talk at the UK's largest occupational psychology conference. What do we think? Brilliant. So Diane's got it there. So it's good reach. You're talking to some really important people. The question I would ask is, it depends who's in the audience first. If it's a group of academics and all you're going to be doing is impacting their academic research, it's very hard to show impact. But if it's a group of practitioners who are going to go off and use what they've learnt, there's potentially quite good impact there. We would just need to find a way of following it up. So we would have to say, right, can I contact the people that came to this conference in 6 months' time? Can I ask them if they've gone on to use what I talked about? And then we can start collecting the evidence of impact. So that's essentially what I've said there. I think this is the last one. So a researcher has their sustainable clothesline used in London Fashion Week. What do we think? This is interesting. So we're getting some interesting responses from that. And this is where I would say, oh, well, it depends on the field you're working in. If you're a fashion researcher, the kind of one of the most impactful things you can do is to be involved in an exhibition like this, because it's really one of the biggest exhibitions in the country, and as a result, the really important people in your field are going to be seeing your clothes, and it might lead. And if you can evidence kind of impact through the route that you need to evidence it, then we can show really impressive impact for this field. Some of you are saying, oh, but it doesn't go on. I can't see how it benefits the wider world overall. But really, this is why we think about things in different research areas and different fields. And it's something you could ask if you are sitting if you're going to go to the arts and humanities session later, you can ask Joe about it. Is that we have to consider impact in different ways. And yes, to a medical researcher at first glance, where's the impact? But to someone who thinks about the impact in a different way, we could argue that there is very good impact here to be had. We just need to think about the evidence we might collect. And that's what I've kind of put there. Brilliant. So really good thinking from everyone. I think a lot of you seem on the same page in terms of how this works. And I think you're really getting it, which is great. So we have to think very clearly about, as I mentioned, how we're going to embed evidence collection into our impact activities. So you have to think about how you're going to achieve it. A lot of the ways might be, if you're seeking to benefit individual people, you want to get their responses, you want to find out their behaviour change, you need to think about surveys and how you're going to follow up. So if you put a video on YouTube, then I've said to researchers before, well, why not have a survey ready built in I don't know, Google Forms or SurveyMonkey, and perhaps then you can have that in the comments section, and you can have a bit at the end of the video that says please fill out the survey, and we can collect evidence of impact that way. Monitoring for published reports. If you've ever seen anything about altmetrics, a lot of your, if you publish an article, you can go and look at the stats. It's not just the number of people that have cited you. Altmetrics will give you whether it's gone into a published report. So in medical, for example, in the medical field, that might be a NICE guideline, which is a guideline that a lot of practitioners and clinicians will see, and therefore you can see immediately the impact that you've had. We might ask for testimonials. For ref case studies, we're asking for testimonials. It's tricky at the time, particularly because of GDPR, for you to just go, can I have a testimonial now? I'm going to sit on it for the next 5 years, and if I need it, I'll use it. You can't really do that. But what you can do is you can ask the people involved in the future, can we link up on LinkedIn or something like that? And then if I need to contact you in the future, is that okay? You can just kind of request to be kept in the loop. So it's worth just saying, oh, if you're having any, if you're going to use my research, do you mind just letting me know if any changes happen as a result, or can I just follow up with you if any changes have happened? And it's also useful to monitor social media as well and see how debates are happening and seeing whether things are changing. I mean, one of the ways in which you achieve really strong impact, sometimes we say, is just having a strong social media presence, having a strong online presence just facilitate a lot of impact. So it's something to bear in mind. And I think it's something we'll talk about a little bit later. So identifying your stakeholders, identifying your beneficiaries. And we sometimes say stakeholders because actually sometimes there are stakeholders who aren't just going to benefit from your research. There are ones which are probably going to be negatively affected from your research. So for example, if you're doing research on the impacts of tobacco, then you've got to think about the tobacco companies being a negative stakeholder. And it's something we need to think about in your whole research plan, but actually really for what we're doing now, for purposes of this session, we're really only thinking about our beneficiaries. So you can kind of perform a basic kind of stakeholder beneficiary analysis, just asking a few very simple questions. So what aspects of your research is the beneficiary likely to be interested in? So you've thought of a beneficiary, there's specific aspects of your research they're going to be interested in, or they're going to be interested in the whole amount. What you need to think about your research in terms of, do I need to evolve it slightly to benefit that, for that beneficiary to be more interested? How do I might change things? How might they be able to facilitate your ability to gain impact? So is it that if you're working on a new drug, when it comes to market, are we going to have to go through drug companies, or do I need to go and talk to the business people at the university in terms of us setting up a separate company to sell these? There's all sorts of things we can think about, but we have to think about, right, in order to get my product to market, I'm going to have to go and work with someone who's going to benefit from it, from my research. So you have to think about how they, not just the impact that that company might have, but how they might be help you facilitate even more impact. Kind of, you can score it 1 to 5. What importance could your research have on them? So you might be able to list 10 different potential beneficiaries, and you might be able to say, right, 3 of these I've scored 5. They're the ones I'm going to be mostly focusing on and mostly looking at how we can engage them. And then what methods could you use to involve them in your research? So my research is into creating different materials for construction. I've found 12 different small medium companies that I've scored 5 in my stakeholder analysis. I'm going to invite them all to an event. I'm going to talk about my research, and I'm going to give them an opportunity to engage with me on my research. And then you can think about how you're going to engage those beneficiaries in that way. This is something I just want to show to you. You know, we do our training as research impact officers at Wolverhampton, but we do use other people's resources quite often. And a really good website that, if you're looking to improve your knowledge of impact and improve the impact of your research, is if you go to this website, which is Fast Track Impact. There's a book as well. There's a couple of books actually, I think. So Professor Mark Reed, he's an academic at Newcastle University, but he works in his academic background is kind of peatland conservation, but he has done a huge amount about research impact. You want me to just paste that? I can type it into the. And he's probably one of the leading, if not the leading expert in research impact in the country and internationally, really, as well. So on his website, there's all sorts of tools, there's all sorts of blogs and videos and all sorts of things that will help you learn a bit more about research impact. But one of the things he does is he talks a lot about how you embed it in your research. And I think if you came to me and said, Ben, I've only got a minute, how do I get more impact in my research? I would say the one thing I would say is think about it from day one. When you're forming your research questions, think about impact from day one, how you're going to achieve impact, and plan it in from the start, and then you'll be fine. And that's kind of what I said here. It's a boring answer. It's careful planning. You have to plan it. By taking time at the start of your project, when you're not going to see the immediate benefits of that work you're putting in, will save you time in the end, and it will make your research much more impactful in the future. Mark Reed comes up with these 5 kind of principles to deliver significant impact. So set up objectives for impact alongside your research questions. And this is something that jars a lot with a lot of academics, because we're used to just coming up with our research questions and going out and trying to work on them and coming and collecting our data and answering our research questions. We don't then think, oh, if I find that I've answered this research question in this way, what's the impact I'm going to have? And really, we're saying this is what you need to do from day one. And if you do this from day one, you actually find that your research questions will be slightly different, and you will come up, you'll answer your questions in a different way. You'll probably collect different data, and you'll realize that as a result, your research has been enhanced. And so think about it from day one. And that's the key thing. That's the most important thing. As we've mentioned, identify the stakeholders who will be interested in your research, not just the ones that are going to benefit, but potentially the ones that could be negatively impacted as well. Just identify them, just so you know they're there, just so you need to monitor them. Because if you release, if you are looking for funding and actually you find out that I want to work in water conservation, I'm going to apply for funding in this specific fund, and actually realize that actually oil companies are the ones that supply the money for that fund. There's a conflict of interest. By having thought about the stakeholders in my research, I already know to look out for these certain companies, and I'm safer as a result. Work with your stakeholders, ensure a two-way process. So a lot of research is enhanced because they talked to their beneficiaries from day one. They came up with their research questions together, and as a result, there's your pathway to impact from day one. And actually, a lot of it's like maybe later career academics have found that as a result, the company that they've talked to have funded a PhD or done all sorts of things, so they actually might even get a bit of money as a result. Identify early impacts, and this is particularly important for people who have slightly more long-term projects. So if the example I always use is if you're working on a drug, it might be 10, 15, 20 years before that drug's available to the public after all the trials. So really, we want to think about the impacts we could be having from day one. So if you're working on a cancer treatment, why not say within the first 12 months, we're going to visit a certain number of schools and we're going to talk about cancer awareness, and we're going to use our research that we're working on now, saying we're doing this cutting edge research on cancer treatments, and use that to kind of as public engagement. There's all sorts of things we can do, but this is what Mark Reed suggests, you know, plan it in from, identify what kind of early impact we can do, and then reflect and kind of think about what you're doing. So he suggests setting up every 3 months, for example, putting in your calendar, right, I'm going to think about my research impact, I'm going to think about how the project's going, and I'm going to see if I'm going to be hitting my impact objectives. And if you go on Fast Track Impact, there's all sorts of documents and things that will help you plan your impact a lot more. And this is what I'm going to show you now very quickly. So you can get more or less complicated versions of these. So these are impact plan templates. So you can plan in your impacts using Word or Excel or anything, and you can think about it. So what's your objective for impact? So it's very obviously we've got a huge range of different researchers sat in this room at the moment, so this will vary very differently. So think about what your objective for impact might be. Think about the timeline: 12 months, 5 years, 10 years. Name a beneficiary who might be interested in this. So you might have multiple beneficiaries for the same impact, but this is something that you might be able to have a go at now. We've got about 5 minutes before the next session, so if you did want to draw this up for your own on a piece of paper now, go for it. Name a beneficiary who might be interested. What do they stand to gain from your impact? So from the research, what are they actually going to be able to gain? How can they help you facilitate your impact? So are they going to be able to help you bring your product to market, or are they going to be able to provide a bit of money to support your project, or whatever it might be? How are you going to engage them in the process, as we've mentioned? So are you going to go through your contacts? If you know someone who works with them elsewhere, are you going to, like I said, put on an event? How are you going to actually engage with them? Because that's something that really people don't necessarily think about. And sometimes we find that all of a sudden academics just sent an email out to every, let's say, police force in the whole of the country saying, are you interested in my research? And that's not going to work, because the right people aren't going to read it, and it's going to read like a stock email that's been sent out, and why would I engage with that? So we have to really think about that quite carefully. And then, of course, as we mentioned all the way through, kind of what evidence of impact you need to collect. So I'm going to stop there. I realise I'm sort of pushing time a little bit, actually. I'm going to leave this on the screen in case any of you are kind of drawing this up at the moment. We've got about 5 minutes. As I mentioned, we've got the subject-specific sessions coming up next. So I'm going to be talking about health and well-being, and then I'm going to be talking about science and engineering. Chris is going to be talking about social sciences at 12. Joe's going to be talking about arts and humanities at 12:30. So if you've got any specific questions, you can take it to those sessions. I think all of us have left a good 10 or 15 minutes for questions. But if you've got any specific questions now, we've got a few minutes, so feel free to ask about kind of general impact questions. I'm more than happy to answer, or of course you can ask the question a little bit later. I think we'll make the slides. I'll send all the slides to Deborah, and then I'm not sure what she's doing, whether it's we're just doing the recording and then you can see them, or whether they'll be made available.
If you're okay with it, I can drop it into the chat box so that they become available.
Yeah, do you need me to send it to you?
Yes, please. We are recording. This will be on our YouTube channel. Oh, I can hear myself.
I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. So.
Here we go. So that's our YouTube channel. Sorry, that's our YouTube.
Right. Is this kind of impact research, impact workshop available to new researchers at the University of Wolverhampton? Yes, we're working on them. So as I said, I've only been post about a year, and we've tried out a few different types of sessions. So we do a few through the doctoral college that you can find on the within the almanac that the doctoral college publish. They are available, and they're similar to this. And actually, I think a couple of people have been in these sessions before, so they'll see some overlap in terms of what I've talked about. So it is available, and we'll be doing more in the future. We really are working on our training plan in terms of what we can do. How much impact will employers expect early career researchers to have made? So if you're going on to be an academic, I think historically they would probably not have asked too much about your impact, but we are fairly sure that you don't be surprised if you apply for a job and within the job description it mentions impact, and within what they're requesting you to write about in your, you might be wanting to put it in your academic CV as well to make sure it's there. And then don't be surprised if you go on to be asked the question in the interview, as I mentioned. So you don't have to have had impact, but if you can very clearly say the pathway to impact that I see my research having, then you're going to be doing well. So I think, Rachel, it's worth thinking about, and I think it's worth having an answer to that, for example, if you're invited to interview. Oh, so there you go. So in terms of evidence, yeah, I think it'd be more important if you were applying for an academic job. I think it's less important to say, oh, like I said, I've demonstrated impact in the past. Great if you have, but if you can say how you would demonstrate impact in the future, that's going to be better. And I think you maybe would mention the kind of evidence you might collect then as well. Bro. Right, okay, so what I'm going to do is we're going to take a 2-minute break, I guess. I'm going to put up the slides for the start of the health and wellbeing session. Like I said, if you want to drop out and come back to the other sessions, feel free. So we've got health and wellbeing now 11 till 11:30. We've got science and engineering 11:30 till 12. We've got social sciences 12 till 12:30, and history's in that as well. And then we've got arts and humanities from 12:30 till 1. So I'm going to take a couple of minutes break, and then I'll see you in a second.